If you want to make more profit in your kitchen design business, then you need to watch this video. This is Dave Custance, the Kitchen Design Pro, and he's going to tell us everything we need to know about measuring a kitchen job site so that we can avoid costly mistakes. Why are your tips for measuring properly so important?
Measuring the job site is so important because it's really the foundation of the entire kitchen project. I mean, you could have a kitchen that's designed beautifully, that looks great, that functions perfect, it's been ordered correctly, it's been delivered on time, the finish is perfect, but if it doesn't fit, all that goes right down the drain. And we can lose a lot of profit. Now, the reason my tips are so important is because sometimes measuring a job site can seem very overwhelming, especially if you're not used to a construction site. I've worked with lots of designers who say they get intimidated by a job site. So my simple tips break it down. Not only do I explain what to measure and how to measure, but more importantly, why to measure. When we understand why we're measuring certain things, we're much more confident, our measures are more accurate, and we can offer a lot to the builder. When we're confident, we can say, hey, this can light is too close, you need to move it. We can save him a lot of money, a lot of headache, and who's he gonna call next when he needs cabinets?
All right, so obviously when we come to a job site, we want to be enclosed and we're not afraid of getting dirty, yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay, what else?
I'm glad you brought that up, because many designers will show up on a job site in black slacks, and they're more worried about getting sawdust on their clothes or mud on their shoes than measuring the job site. And I don't mean any disrespect by that, but when we're out here measuring, we need to be out here ready to work, ready to get dirty, ready to show that we're here to measure and get a clear understanding of the job site. We'll gain a lot of respect from the builder, and we'll do a much better job.
So what tools should we bring with us to the site?
Well, we want to bring a variety of tools. We want to start with a tape measure, obviously a clipboard that has lots of blank paper and has all of my check notes on it, a pencil, a razor knife for sharpening the pencil. I bring a framing square, a level at least 4 feet long, an angle finder or a bevel, and a protractor. When it comes to our tape measure, we want to make sure that we have at least 25 foot, maybe 30 foot, and the most important thing is that it's a wide rule. We want to be able to span quite a distance without the tape measure bending and falling down. A lot of times we're measuring by ourselves long distances, so that's very important. The other thing we want to make sure of is that its measure's accurate. I check my tape measure before every job site measure. So we're going to check our tape measure. What we're doing is checking to make sure the tip isn't bent and that it's measuring accurately. So we're going to hook it on the edge and make a mark. In this case, I'll mark it on the 4. Then we're going to do what we call burning an inch, where I'm going to slide it over, put the 1 inch mark right on the edge, and it's on the 5. That's now 4 inches. It's accurate, so we're ready to go. The framing square is a very important tool to take out to the job site measure. Many designers don't bring it, but I was taught to, and I always have, and it's saved me many times. A lot of great things you can do with it. Obviously, check walls for square. It's a great straight edge. You can use it to lay out angles on the floor. And there's some other cool things you can do with it too. Let me show you. A lot of people don't know this, but with a framing square, you can find a 45-degree angle, a 22.5-degree angle, very simply. You start by drawing a straight line, and from there, you can find a 45-degree angle simply by putting the same number on the line. So the 5 and the 5 on the inside of the square, if I match that up on the same line, I know this is now a 45-degree angle. I can do that with any number. The 4s, the 8, as long as it's the same one, that's a 45-degree angle. By the same token, if I want to find half of that, a 22.5-degree angle, I simply put it on the 4 here and the 8 here. That will show me that angle. Make a mark. So that's a great way to use the framing square. Also, we want to check our framing square just like we check the tape measure. And to do that, you start with a straight line again. You put the square on the line. You make a line. You always want to go the full length of the square. And then you simply flip the square over. Line it up with the line again. And if it's parallel and even with that line, then it's square. This one is. Now, if it's not square, what do? A lot of people don't know you can adjust a framing square. All you do is take a hammer and smack it. Now, if you need it to go out, you smack it on the inside corner right here. I'm not gonna smack this one because it's good. If I needed it to come in, I would smack it on the outside corner and that would pull it in. So then you would do that, recheck it, and when it gets to the point where both lines are the same, you're good. Another great feature of the framing square is that we can use it to check the outcropping or the drop of our crown molding. As you know, when we put a piece of crown molding on the cabinet, it comes out like this. We can't just measure across here to know what the measurements are going to be out or down. So, a lot of people don't know this is a great way to use your framing square. You simply take the crown molding, put it in the square so that the edges are tight, bottom and top, because you can move it back and forth. Make sure both edges are tight and against the framing square, and I can easily tell what the outcropping of the crown is. I'm coming out 2 7/8 and I'm dropping down 3 1/4. I simply look at the lines on the square where the crown molding lines up. The level.
Yes.
Another very important tool to bring out to a job site. Mostly what I use it for is a straight edge. I'll use it to draw lines, project lines out on the floor. Once in a while I'll use it to check that a wall is plumb or a windowsill is level. But one thing you never want to do is check a wall or a windowsill in front of a homeowner. Walls don't have to be perfectly plumb and they don't have to be perfectly level, but if a customer sees that it isn't, it could cause a huge headache for the builder. And remember, we're out here to help the builder and to establish relationships.
What about these?
This I've always called an angle finder. The true name is a bevel and obviously a protractor from elementary school. What I use this for is to check angles. If you have an angled wall, this can come out and you can put it on any wall, tighten it down, and check the angle. So the way we use the bevel is to check an angled wall. We keep it loose, put it flat on this surface, make sure that the corner is right in the corner of the bevel, and we move it to where the metal portion is also tight to the other angle, and we tighten the wing nut. And that's our angle. Now that we have the angle, we just simply put the protractor up against here, and we slide it to where the center line on the protractor is right at the angle of the bevel, and we project out at the angle, and you can see that that's at 45 degrees.
So before we get started, what questions do we need to ask the contractor or the job foreman?
Well, our main purpose for being on the job site here is to leave with accurate measurements and a clear understanding of the job site. More importantly, a clear understanding of what the finished job site will be like. What we have to do here is measure the rough framing and calculate that to understand what the finished project is going to be like by knowing what goes on the walls, what goes on the floors, the ceiling, the window and door treatments.
So, I'm sorry, but why don't we just wait till everyone's done to measure?
That's a great question, and it'd be much better if we could come in here and measure when everything's finished. The problem is, it takes cabinets 6 to 8 weeks to be manufactured and delivered. And if we wait until the job site's finished to measure, it'll be stagnant for 6 to 8 weeks. So we measure now, we get the designs finalized, and the cabinets ordered. Meanwhile, the kitchen is going on.
All right. Dave has designed a checklist to help you remember to get all of your measurements. So the first item on the list, Dave, is wall dimensions. What should we do first?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that the checklist is simply to make sure we remember to take all of our measurements. So before I leave this job site, I make sure every box is checked. It doesn't have to be in any certain order. But I am going to do the walls first here. I've talked to the builder. I know that we're using 1/2-inch sheetrock in this kitchen, which means that every wall we see that has studs is going to be covered in 1/2-inch sheetrock. So that means I have to subtract whenever this goes on the wall. So,
all right.
First thing I'm going to do is draw a sketch. I draw a sketch of the entire kitchen floor plan, and I draw my measurements on there. It doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be accurate, it doesn't have to be to scale, the dimensions have to be accurate. So I just sketch that out. Okay, and I draw my dimension lines in, and then I get started. I like to work clockwise, so this will be the first wall that I measure.
All right, I'll hold this for you.
Now, this is a unique wall because we have a finished wall on the outside here, which means we're subtracting a 1/2 inch for sheetrock from this side, but we're adding a 1/2 inch for sheetrock on the front here, which in essence means we don't have to subtract or add anything. It's the same. So this dimension is 35 3/4. If I subtract a 1/2 inch and add a 1/2 inch, it's still 35 3/4. So that's my dimension, 35 3/4. So I come to my sketch, and I'm going to write 35 3/4. Now it's important to note that you want all of your dimensions to read the same way. So when I'm looking at my plan, I can read every dimension. You don't want to have to constantly turn your plan when you're looking. So I've written 35 3/4. And I'm going to write my own little abbreviation here, which is FW to FW, which simply means finished wall to finished wall. That tells me that I've subtracted and added for the sheetrock. Now you can do it any way. You can add and subtract as we go and do it finished, or you could measure the whole site rough and add when you get back to your office. Add or subtract the sheetrock, the flooring, the things we've asked the builder about. It's just important that you know which way you're doing it. If I didn't do that math in my head here, I'd simply measure the whole job and write rough wall to rough wall. Then I know. Do it any way you want, just make sure it's very clear how you've done it. Okay, so here I'm going to measure this wall. This is called an inside wall-to-wall dimension. And we remember the 1/2 inch is going on each wall. So we're going to subtract a 1/2 inch from that wall, a 1/2 inch from that wall. So we're subtracting overall 1 inch. Now one thing to note is on the back of every tape measure, it tells you the measurement of the body of the tape. So theoretically, you could take the tape measure and run it tight to where the body's up against the stud, look at your dimension and add 3 inches. I don't like to do it that way. It's not as accurate. So I like to take the tape measure, tight to the corner, and bend it. Don't worry, it's fine. 93 5/8 is the dimension. I have to subtract 1 inch, so 92 5/8 is my finished wall-to-wall dimension. Again, finished wall, FW to finished wall. I do those on every dimension, so I'm clear on what's happening. Okay, the other thing that I want to check while I'm here is the Sub-Zero, electrical and plumbing. That's another thing that's on the list. It's not in order, but we're here at the wall, so we're going to do it. I found out what the specs were for the Sub-Zero and I downloaded the info from the internet. Awesome thing, when I used to do this, we didn't have the internet. We had to go to books and look it up. So it was great, it was right there. So what it's telling me is for the electrical, one thing about Sub-Zero is they are very specific about their electrical. It's a very small window. In this case, it has to be a minimum 75 1/2 inches off the finished floor and in a window of 7 inches above that. So 75 1/2 inches. So again, what I know through asking the builder is that we have 3/4 inch hardwood going on the floor here. So that means that I have to allow for 3/4 when I'm doing my measurement. So there's just a vapor barrier under that, which we don't have to worry about. It may have been tile, then I would have had to say, is there underlayment? All we need to know is what's the full thickness of the floor. And in this case, it's 3/4 of an inch. So I've got 76 7/8 of an inch to the bottom. Now when we allow for the 3/4, that puts me at 76 1/8. So it's 76 1/8 off the finished floor, and Sub-Zero is saying that we should have 75 1/2. So we're about a 1/2 inch, 5/8 off. It's not going to be a big deal. There'll be plenty of room for the plug to get in there, so we're okay there. Now it also says that we should be 6 inches off the finished wall, somewhere in that window. We're 3 3/4, allow for the 1/2 inch, we're at 3 1/4. So we're plenty of room, looks good. We'll move on. Okay, now we're going to talk about the plumbing location for the Sub-Zero. Again, it's pretty exacting as to where they want it to be. So I've printed it out from the internet, and I know that they want it at least 6 inches off the wall to the left, and then in an 18-inch window from there. So I can just really quick on the floor, 6 inches. Now remember, there's going to be 1/2 inch sheetrock on the wall, so I'm actually going to measure 6 1/2. And then I'm just gonna put my tape on that mark and go 18 inches, even though I can see it's well within there. So that's our window from here to here. So we're well within that window. Now, they also say that it has to be 3 inches or less off the floor. Well, I think we missed that one. It's at 11. We're gonna have hardwood of 3/4, so we raise it up 3/4. We're at 10 1/4 to this plumbing. So it's way too high. Now I know that for Sub-Zero, this is a 1/4 inch line that actually comes down and runs out to the front and connects in the front of the refrigerator. So it's possible that they could put a junction on here and run it down and out, but it's definitely something I'm gonna bring up to the builder so that he knows. Again, these are things that a lot of designers don't want to take the time to learn, or that they get very confused about, but it's pretty elementary if we just take the time to understand. When we can understand the appliances and the locations and we can help the builder with that, we're much more valuable to them. Okay, now we're gonna measure this wall. Again, 1/2 inch sheetrock on the back, 1/2 inch sheetrock on the front. Technically, it's not gonna be quite a 1/2 inch because this is a 45-degree angle, but it's close enough for what we're doing. So we take our dimension, 30 1/4. Remember, the rough is the same as the finished in this case because we're subtracting and adding. Always check twice. This is kind of a rough cut wall, so it goes back and forth, but I'm gonna call it 30 3/8. So 30 3/8. Now one thing I'm gonna check while I'm here is the depth of my Sub-Zero cabinet, because I like to make my cabinets 26 inches deep, so that the 24-inch deep base cabinet, when the countertop overhangs, it dives into the side of the cabinet. We can talk about all this when we do the design part, but I know 26 inches deep is gonna be my cabinet. So I've got 26, plus the crown molding, we can't forget that. We measured that earlier and it was 2 7/8. So that's gonna put me at 28 7/8, plus the 1/2 inch sheetrock. I'm gonna be back plenty of room from the wall there. So those are the things we wanna check for while we're out here, because at this point we could add to this wall if we needed to, or we could adjust our design.
One of the dimensions on your checklist is floor to ceiling. Tell me about that.
Well, the floor to ceiling dimension is very important if we have cabinets going to the ceiling. In other words, the upper cabinets have crown molding on them and they're going tight to the ceiling. In this case, the ceilings are really high. We're open above, they call it, so we don't have to worry about it. But if we did, that would be a very critical dimension. So we have to measure from the floor to ceiling, and we have to allow the finished floor and the finished sheetrock on the ceiling. In this case, it's 3/4 inch hardwood and a 1/2 inch sheetrock. So we have to take this dimension and subtract 1 1/4 inches. I always measure the floor to ceiling in the corners, and I always measure in every corner of the room. I'm not going to do it here for the video, but we want to do every corner because it will vary. So I have 119 1/2. I'm going to subtract a 1/2 inch for the ceiling sheetrock. That gives me 119 3/4 for the flooring. So I'm at 118 1/4. So I'm going to write, I always do my floor to ceiling in the center of my plan. So 118 1/4 FF, finished floor, to FC, finished ceiling. I put a circle around it. I don't know why. So the reason, when we measure every corner, we're going to have discrepancies, and we always want to go with the smallest dimension. Whatever the shortest dimension is, that's the one we go with, because when we get out here with cabinets, we can always raise our crown molding up, but we can't bring it down, it will run into the doors. The other dimension we're going to take here is the wall to wall. This is a very long wall. A lot of times we're out here by ourselves, so I measure on the floor. I'm at 179 inches. I have to allow a 1/2 inch sheetrock over there, a 1/2 inch sheetrock over here. So I'm at 178 inches. I write 178, finished wall, FW, to finished wall. The other dimension I'm going to take while I'm here is this one. Remember, this is another wall where we're subtracting a 1/2 here and adding a 1/2 here. So it's exactly the same, 26 1/2. 26.5, FW to FW. The other thing I want to check while I'm here is this gas. This is for the range. I'm just going to do a quick measurement to check the center line. 68.5. Allow ½ inch for sheetrock. I'm at 68 and an inch, or 68 inches. So I'm going to do a line with a C through it, which means center. 68 inches. And I'm going to write gas for range. The other thing that we have here is plumbing for a pasta pot filler. So I'm going to take my dimensions of that. I'm at about 60 3/4 to center. Allow a ½ inch for sheetrock, puts me at 60 1/4. Now what I like to do when I'm measuring plumbing like this is do a separate drawing that's a front or an elevation view. I'll just do a very quick drawing of the wall, and I'll draw the pasta pot filler here. I'll write up here, pasta filler. Make my dimension lines, check it again. $60 1/4 to center. Again, I'm going to note that that's from the finished wall because I allowed for ½ inch. So finished wall to center. Now, the off the floor is very critical here because if you get it too low, there might be some pots that won't fit underneath it. So not only is the supply line location critical, but also what type of faucet are you using? What kind of gooseneck, how long is that? It all has to come into play. So we're at 50 1/2, remember 3/4 of an inch for flooring. So we come up 3/4, we're at 49 3/4 to center. $49 3/4. FF, finished floor, center. Now notice I did my little hash lines here to where my dimensions go. That's to the center, this is the plumbing. Now we have those dimensions. I happen to know that the homeowner came out here with her pot and they put the faucet here and checked it out. So we know we're good, but at least I have the dimensions now.
Also on the checklist is wall to window dimensions. What do we need to remember about that?
The wall to window dimensions are very important. What we need to remember is we need to know what kind of window treatment is going to go on here, or what kind of casing and sills and that kind of thing, what the finished product is going to be. Many times we'll have cabinets on either side of the window, and I'm a stickler for having even reveals between the casing and the finished end of the cabinet on each side for them being the same. Therefore, I have to know where is that casing going to come to. I've talked to the builder, keeping with the craftsman style, he's using a square 3 1/2 inch casing, and he's doing what we call a 1/4 inch reveal. This is called the jamb of the window. The casing is going to mount on here. Can I see that piece of sheetrock?
Sure.
We don't have the casing here, so I'm going to use this as an example. If this were the casing, it would mount on the jamb here and leave a 1/4 inch reveal right here. Therefore, I know that if this is 3 1/2 inches and this is a 1/4 inch, I'm actually going to be 3 3/4 from the inside of the jamb to the outside of the casing. So I'll make that note here, 3 3/4 inside jamb to outside casing. So I'll know when I get back to my office and I'm working on the design, I can take that dimension. So now the dimension that I'm going to take is from the wall to the inside of the jamb, since that's where I went from my casing. And I have 26 3/4. Now let's remember that we have a ½ inch sheetrock on the wall. So I'm going to minus my ½ inch. So I'm 26 1/4 finished wall to inside window jamb. So I write 26 1/4 FW IWJ. So that's that. That's that. I'm also going to take a dimension of the window height. And there's really nothing going above the window. I just want this for my design. When I draw the window in, I want it to be right and look to scale. So from the rough sill to the top of the window jamb, actually I'll go to the inside like I did here, I'm at 60 inches. So I'm going to make that note, 60 inches. And I'm going to write this out, rough sill to inside top jamb. And one thing I want to point out really quick while we're here is look at all these pipes that are here on the wall. Earlier, I shot every one of these walls with my digital camera, and I keep those in a file and hand them to the installer. It's very possible he might want to screw the side of this cabinet into the wall here and find a stud. We don't want to screw into one of these pipes. So it's great, the digital age, to have that camera and be able to look at all this. Okay, the other dimension we want to take is from the floor to the sill. You can see this great open window they'll be passing things through outside, and we want to make sure that the countertops go into the sill. That's how it's designed. So I'm going to measure from the floor to the rough sill, and right here we're at 35 1/4. Remember, we have 3/4 of an inch flooring we have to allow for, so we're going to come up 3/4 of an inch, and that's 34 1/2. 34 1/2 is exactly what the height of our cabinets are before countertop. Typically we have 1.5 inch countertop, so we have 34 1/2 plus 1.5 inches gives us 36. So what that means is when the finished floor is on, the cabinets will come right to this sill. Then the 3/4 inch underlayment, or I should say substrate for the granite top, will come in, and then the granite. So we'll have on top of this 1.5 inches. Let's double check it. 35 1/4, 34 1/2. We'll have 3/4 plus 3/4. 3/4 plywood, 3/4 granite, and it gives us 1.5 inches. We're at 1 3/4 inches here, 1 13/16 inches. So we're going to be about 1/4 inch to 5/16 right above the counter, which is perfect. Now something I want to point out is when I was here last week and measured this, this unfinished sill was at 36, which meant the countertops would have come right to the unfinished sill. I pointed it out to the builder, and they had to cut every one of these studs and drop this window down. Now imagine if that would have gone all the way through sheetrock and everything, and they had to deal with it after cabinets were here, it would have been a nightmare. So there's another situation where I was able to give him a lot of help and save a lot of headaches. So that's that. The next thing we'll measure is the plumbing. We want to make sure that this plumbing is going to fit inside of the cabinet. So we're just going to measure to centers. Now what I do here is, again, I do another sheet of paper, much like I did over there with the pasta pot filler, and I do a really quick sketch of the wall. So here's the wall, here's the window, and here's my plumbing. I draw each plumbing component in. So I've got this drain and 4 supply lines. And I put an S in the supply lines and a D in the drain. And then I put a mark out of each one of these for height and a mark out of each one of these for measuring from the wall. These are really close, so I'm just going to measure one. We usually have a lot of leeway with these inside the cabinet. So 74 1/2, allow for 1/2 inch sheetrock. I'm 74 to the center of both of those. So now we're going to measure the height of the supply lines. If I measure here, I'm at 11 1/4, and I have to allow 3/4 inch for flooring, so that puts me to 10 1/2 inches. And the next one is at 15 1/4. These are 82 1/4, allow for sheetrock, 81 3/4. And the height is really close. The height is good. I'm going to keep the height the same. That's our plumbing. We have our electrical here. I'm going to measure that. That has to fit inside the cabinet. That's for an Insta-Hot. 89 to 91. And allow for sheetrock. 88 1/2 to 90 1/2. And off the floor, I'm not even going to worry about because I can see it fits in the cabinet. So that one's good.
One of the final items on your checklist is a wall-to-door dimension, and in our case, I guess it's a window-to-door dimension. What's the best way to do this?
Well, the best way is to stick to what we've been doing, making it easy as possible. We've been using the inside window jamb as our reference, so we're going to stick with that. We don't have a finished window or a door. That's actually a door with what we call a light on the side, which is a window, but it will have trim. So we're going to measure the rough opening. So we have 61 inches from the rough door opening to the inside window jamb. Again, we don't have any sheetrock or anything to allow for, but I do know what the rough opening is now, or what it is to the rough opening. So I know there's going to be a 5/8 jamb in there, same as the window, and a 3.5 inch casing with a 1/4 inch reveal. It all sounds really confusing, but I can sit back in my office and lay it all out and figure out exactly how much space I have to that casing. Now, it's important that you can use whatever you want. If you want to measure to the outside of the jamb, or you want to measure, however you want to do it is fine, as long as you know how to note that on your drawings and you're clear about it when you get back to your office.
Dave, you make these tips really easy to follow, especially if we use your checklist. What else do we need to consider when creating a profitable design?
Well, the other main areas we need to consider are pricing the jobs, designing our jobs, and ordering our jobs. These are the areas we typically make mistakes, and I have tips that can help you minimize mistakes in all those areas.